Ruth chapter 4. It was interesting this morning when I was looking over the news, looking to see if any other churches had been bombed, as was the case last Sunday, or compiling our prayer list for this Sunday morning. USA Today's front page online edition, if you scroll down the page, there was two articles or two headlines, top and bottom. One of them is the necessity of Americans looking for heroes and heroines, and the line right below that was, "Is Christmas even necessary anymore?" And if you click on the one that says Americans are searching for heroes, and I actually posted the article on my Facebook. If you follow me on Facebook, and I'm not big into Facebook, so I'm not offended if you don't. I don't necessarily like it or endorse it or anything of that sort. But if you go read the article, it talks about how Americans are searching for a hero, or searching for a king. They're searching for something. And in the last year, Americans have spent over $2 billion going to the theater in search of some type of heroine, and looking at different types of movies, and whether it be Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever's come out lately. I have 3 kids, so I don't go to the movies very often. For those of you with children, you understand. But that's been the trend for the last year. Almost $2.4 billion consuming movies that display some type of hero figure in it. And what the article goes on to explain is they even quote Tim Keller in this opinion piece about how this points us back to our need and our desire for an ultimate hero in this world, and our desire for an ultimate redeemer. And it points us back to, we're looking for something greater. We're looking for something to remove us from this situation that we find us. We want for something to take our minds off from what we're in. And then you scroll down 2 lines further on that front page on USA Today Online, and you see the headline, "Is Christmas even necessary anymore?" And you read about the commercialization, the industry. Why do we even do it? We're just exchanging money for money and things of that nature. And so we come at this weekend with 2 opposing viewpoints of Americans looking for a hero. They're looking at the world, looking for a rescuer. They're looking for a redeemer. And then the consumerism, the consumeristic viewpoint. And as we come at Ruth chapter 4, we come at it from the very same viewpoint. Remember, we come at this understanding of the book of Ruth, a time in the life of the people of God when time after time after time they had gone back to looking for a hero in themselves. They had gone back to looking for pleasure and self-worth in something of their culture and something of their own land. And they find themselves in the time of the Judges, a time when we have been talking about this over the last few weeks, when they kept thinking, if I can just find pleasure in some other aspect of my life, then it'll be good. And so they kept disobeying God. They kept not following and not worshiping God, and to the point where God would say, fine, do what you want. To the point where they would do it, and they would seek pleasure, and then life would start to fall apart, and God would eventually bring oppression on them, either from a warring nation or warring tribe or neighbor. And they would realize the folly in their way, and then they would cry out for mercy from God. And God would rise up a judge, this type of military ruler, to come in and to restore justice for a time being. So this is the time period when we look at the book of Ruth. A time period where people are looking for a hero. They're looking for a redeemer. And it ties in closely to where we are today. When we look remember Ruth chapter 1, remember a family who fled famine. A family who fled the city of Bethlehem, the city of bread, because there was no bread. Elimelech said, okay, I'm going to go find provision for myself. And he went to Moab, a place that was known for debauchery. It's known for everything but being the people of God. And he said, I'm going to take my family and I'm going to move there. And he goes there, and instead of finding provision, he found death. He himself dies, his 2 sons die, and we remember a widow named Naomi who was bitter, and she was depressed and alone and completely forgot the promise and the providence of God, who truly thought that there was nothing left for her when she returned back to Bethlehem. There was no hope. There was nothing left to live for after losing Elimelech and after losing Mahlon and Chilion. But the story doesn't end in chapter 1. There was this young woman named Ruth who married Mahlon, and one of Naomi's sons. When Naomi heard God's renewed blessing on her homeland, Bethlehem, she packed up and she headed home with Ruth in tow. And after an unsuccessful attempt to send her back home to her people, Ruth pledged to remain loyal even to her own death. And even though bitterness and depression clouded the awareness of what God was doing in the life of Naomi, in chapter 2 we see Ruth take initiative. In chapter 2, we see her take initiative and head to the fields to gather food for the two to eat. And it is in chapter 2 that we find Ruth walking headlong into the providence of God as she finds herself gleaning in the fields of a kinsman, a redeemer named Boaz. Boaz provides for Ruth. He protects her. He feeds her. And it is by her willingness to go that we find God's plan come to fruition. The hopeless situation that we saw in Ruth chapter 1 as they go to Moab and as they come back with nothing but Naomi and this Moabitess named Ruth has become hopeful. Ruth left Moab with the reality of being a poor, begging widow the rest of her life, and now she has found herself the object of redemption, the object of a redeemer, a kinsman. Chapter 3 heats up. Now, if you were here last week, you can laugh at that because it heated up. Ruth proposes marriage to Boaz. Now, all you single ladies in here last week, did any of y'all propose marriage? Okay, no. There's still hope. Ruth proposes marriage to Boaz, and on the threshing floor late one night, but nonetheless, Boaz offers to redeem her if the one that is before him doesn't redeem her first. And as we end chapter 3, we're left with this cliffhanger, wondering if the other redeemer is going to step in, the one who's in first place is going to step in and take the mantle of redemption, or if Boaz is going to have the right of redemption. And so we're kind of left with this cliffhanger of a moment. Boaz and Ruth, we know, have this love for each other. Boaz has protected Ruth. Ruth has found provision. Ruth came back from Moab, this widow who had nothing ahead of her except for probably begging, except for probably gleaning in the fields. She had no outlook on life. If you're looking at some type of return on investment here, it was probably bleak as bleak could be. She had nothing going on for her in this moment. But here, as we saw come out in chapter 2, she says, I'm going to go to the field. She asks Naomi, can I go glean in the fields? She starts gleaning in the fields. Literally, she's picking up the left behinds. She's picking up after the workers. Boaz comes along, takes notice of her. She tells her men to watch after her. She tells the women to stay close to her. He provides protection for her. In chapter 3, we see Naomi say, go after him. It's time for the season to come over, but before the season ends, you need to go up to him. You need to make yourself made aware to him. And she does. But she goes even further. She says, I want you to put your wings over me. Notice in chapter 2, he says to her, may the Lord cover you with his wings. That's the prayer he prays over her. And in chapter 3, she says to him, may you cover me with your wings. And so the prayer she prays over him in chapter 2, she comes back to him in chapter 3, says, may you cover me with your wings. Let you see your prayer answered in yourself. And so in chapter 4, we find ourselves eagerly anticipating a wedding, either the wedding of Boaz and Ruth or Boaz and this other guy. But one way or the other, there's going to be a wedding. Right? And all of us here are hoping it's going to be Boaz. Now, if you read ahead this week, you kind of got the picture. But if you did, don't drop the cliffhanger here. Don't be a spoiler. We're going to dismiss you to the back row. It's kind of like, now get this. Now I have a confession to make in light of recent events and all the topics we've been talking about in the last few Sundays. I have to admit, Whitney actually made the comment the other day that I hadn't watched the Hallmark Channel this Christmas season. So I put it on there the other day, and I went to bed. So we watched the Hallmark Channel all for about 5 seconds. I found the channel. And then I went to bed. So I can confess that, we've been talking about how this is one of those sappy Hallmark stories that's going on here. This is one of those things that's going to start unfolding. So I actually did it. I've been making fun of guys all Christmas season long about this. This is one of those made-for-TV movies things here. This is one of those romantic stories here. We did it. We watched it. We moved on. I went to bed. It was kind of one of those things. It lasted for about 5 minutes. But here we enter this scene, and Ruth is waiting. She's anticipating marriage. She has just arrived home from the longest, most scandalous biblical night that we can ever imagine, this camping trip, all these things that Naomi has set her up for. But we find at the end of chapter 3 that Boaz says he will not rest until this matter is finished. Naomi promises Ruth that. And here it is morning, we come to Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. It says, "Now Boaz had gone up to the gate, and he sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. And so Boaz says to him, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down here.' And he turned aside and he sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down." Okay, catch this. Catch just these 2 verses. Boaz goes to the city gate and he sits down, and behold, okay, we noticed this and earlier on in chapter 2, just by chance, she happened to be in the field of Boaz, who was a redeemer. Is that a coincidence? No. Is it sovereignty and the providence of God? Yes. Here in chapter 4, verse 1, "And behold, just by chance, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken to came by." And so Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend." He doesn't even call him by name. If we go back to some other translations, it may say, "Mr. Such and Such," or "you there." This would be us saying, "Hey, you." I mean, he's going so far to discredit who this person is. He says, "Hey, you, come here and sit down." Now think about this. If you remember back when the housing crisis happened in 2008, 2009, and you remember back when all the short sales happened, you could walk up to the courthouse and all of a sudden they just start auctioning off houses just like right there on the courthouse steps. This is, the city gates are like that. That's where business happens. So Boaz goes down to the city gates where business would happen, and he sees the guy walking back by, and he says, "Hey, you, stop and sit." Now we know who's in charge at the moment here. And then he looks and he sees elders of the city going by, and he says, "Hey, you guys, you come here, sit. We're going to have some business going on here." So he has witnesses necessary to witness a transaction that's about to happen. Really, it's going to be a drill down going on here. He has Mr. Such and Such, the friend going on here, that's sitting here who's about to get drilled. He doesn't know what's about to happen. It's really about to go down. And then he has the witnesses to witness what's about to happen. You think about them as the jury in this trial that's about to go on. So they're here thinking, "Oh, this is going to get good." You have the friend, Mr. Such and Such guy, sitting over here, and this is all happening in public view of the city gates, because that's where business went down. That's where things happen. Now, it's really interesting. Remember, the end of chapter 3, we know that he's not going to waste any time. And this is an extremely common place for things to happen. But Boaz is very direct in calling out what's going on. In verse 3, he says to the Redeemer, now follow his words here, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative." Notice he ties together what's going on here. "Our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Think about this for a moment. I mean, you're seeing this scene unfold. The friend, Mr. So-and-so sitting over here, he's thinking, well, this is a good Wednesday. Boaz is coming along. Naomi's come back from Moab. She's got a piece of land for sale. I'm the next in line to redeem it. Sure, why wouldn't I increase my land? She has no other children. I'm going to increase, my children are going to have more land to inherit when I pass on. This is a good day in the life of the land here. This is going to be good. I mean, think about how Boaz was very intentional in setting this up. I mean, he is, we could almost say, a little bit manipulative in how he's putting this out here. He's saying, think about this for a moment. Naomi's come back. She's got this piece of land. And it's just right. Now, but he says, look at this. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there's no one besides me. And he says, I will redeem it. Then Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth. Oh, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So then the other shoe drops. Now let's just look at the context here, and then we're going to have some fun with it. Let's look back a few books at Leviticus 25, verses 24. There are two words here that are important. Kinsman, redeemer are the English words. And the one word there in the Hebrew, the picture really just says kinsman, meaning the nearest adult male relative, the nearest of the kin to someone. In order to be a kinsman to Naomi and Ruth, this would mean the nearest adult relative to Elimelech and his sons, the nearest kinsman. The redeemer, meaning that the kinsman would have the right, would have the legal right to go and be able to purchase the property, acquiring all the property that belonged to Elimelech. That's their familial, legal right to be able to do something in the day and age of the Hebrew people. Now, this is a law that God had provided in Leviticus 25. And we see this in verse 24. It says, throughout the country that you hold a possession, you must provide the redemption of the land. In verse 25, he goes on to say, if one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells some of his property, his nearest relative is to come and redeem what his countryman has sold. If, however, a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he himself prospers and acquires sufficient means to redeem it, he is to determine the value for the year since he has sold it and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can go back and own his property. Notice this. So God provides for people, because remember, the most ultimate thing in this day and age is land. So God provides, saying, if one of us were to go broke, somebody in our family is to go aside of us and take care of our land for us. They're to buy it for us and to hold on to us. But if we're able to go and take care of ourselves in the future, we're to be able to go and buy that property and that land back. That's what God says here. We're able to go, pay the interest on that property, and buy it back. Now, when we look at Deuteronomy 25, the picture here is that the land is so much of importance here. And if land was lost because of something, famine or poverty, or even because of death, that means the setup where a kinsman could come in and redeem the land and could keep the land in the family. So that's the picture as it relates to the land. Now, when we look at Deuteronomy 25, we see a picture of the law leading up to this point when it comes to marriage and to God, how God had set up a way for a widow to be provided for. Because remember, it's not just the land here, it's also Ruth, and it's Naomi. These laws aren't exactly being implemented in this day and age. Why? Because during the time of the judges, the people are not really following the law of God. So we listen to Deuteronomy 25:5. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of a family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out of Israel. Now this is important, because when we think about genealogies passing down, it's important that we don't lose the name. So God's going to provide to make sure that his name continues through God, providing a kinsman to provide this circumstance. Verse 7, however, if a man does not marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders at the town gate. Now catch this is fun. She shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. Then the elders of his town shall summon him and talk to him. Well, that's going to be real fun. Think about that. Why aren't you taking care of your sister-in-law? You have a duty to provide a son here. If he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, and spit in his face. The Old Testament law is fun. So bring that back. This is what is done to the man who will not build up his family's line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. I don't think we want to be known as that. Notice here that Boaz leads with the land when he's talking to Mr. Friend here. He leads with the land that Naomi has. He makes the sale that the land and tries to get the Redeemer to take the land, for the land was the sign of wealth. All the people had was land. That was the major currency of the day, and the more land would mean more for his children, especially in light of the fact that Naomi's children were now dead, and his children would now have a much greater inheritance. So the land is great and almost unheard of to find. You rarely get land, and if you get land, you're able to keep it forever. This was a very rare instance until Boaz brought up the fact that the land comes with Ruth. Now, what we know about Ruth is she's a Moabite. So, you get this land, but you get a Moabite with it. And not only do you get Ruth the Moabite, but you get bitter old mother-in-law too. So, by the way, you get all this land, you get Ruth the Moabite, and you get bitter little mother-in-law here. Well, all of a sudden the deal's not working out real well. He's like, let me go talk to my wife about that one. He's like, oh, I don't think it's going to work out. I don't think that this is going to be good for the family. I just, Betty back home is not really going to go real well with having a Moabite come into the house and then having Naomi, who's Mara now, like it's just, let's just keep peace in the house. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just not going to go. Notice what he says here. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. There's so much here. Because think about it. He was thinking in the picture of, if I redeem this land, my children are going to have a greater inheritance. All of a sudden, his children would not inherit this land. For the firstborn of Ruth would take the name of Elimelech and carry on the family name. That child would inherit the land of Mahlon, not his children. So all of a sudden, this land didn't look so good. It didn't look like such a great investment. For all of a sudden, Ruth and bitter mother-in-law, whom he must provide for, would be a burden. And if Ruth had this child, then it would take it all away. So in essence, there's not much in this for him at all. It goes from being a great deal with land to a deal with a lot of strings attached. The first Redeemer backs out in front of everyone. So we pick up in verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to another, and this was a manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought this land, have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead and his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses of this to this day. Catch this. In a great manly fashion here, the Redeemer takes off his sandal, he seals the deal, handing it to Boaz, walks off down the street with one shoe on and one shoe off. That's manly there. Boaz addresses the people here and makes known his full intention. There's no hiding things behind the curtains here. There's no doing things in the shadows here. It's making it very clear. There's no backroom deal. There's no under the table situation. Boaz is announcing his intentions for everybody to know. Boaz was claiming the land that belonged to Elimelech, the land that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon, and also claiming, get this, he claimed Ruth, the Moabite widow, to be his wife and to carry on the name of Mahlon. Boaz had won his woman. He had received his prize, and the anguish of the night was over, and the celebration could begin. No longer did Ruth have to go around the poor, hopeless widow known as the Moabite woman, but now Ruth would be known as Ruth, the wife of Boaz. Think about that for a moment. Think about the end of chapter 1. Naomi announces to the city of Bethlehem, I have left full and I have come back empty. Do not call me Naomi, beautiful and pretty, but call me Mara, bitter. For I left full and I came back empty. And think about it in the background of that picture that we saw in the end of Ruth chapter 1. Ruth is standing there, being referred to as emptiness and nothing. And here in Ruth chapter 4, she has a family. She thought she came back from a foreign land empty. But now we see she came back at the time God wanted her to, with the daughter that God had planned for her to bring back. And verse 11, and all the people who were at the gate and the elder says, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and like Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, and whom Tamar bore to Judah. Because the offspring of the Lord will give you by this young woman. Like they don't just say, okay, my duty here witnessing this is over. No, they pronounce a massive blessing on Boaz here. The response of this people is celebration. They pronounce a blessing of Rachel and Leah. If we go back just a little bit in the Old Testament, the history of Rachel and Leah are the mothers of the 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Judah. They are pronouncing great fertility on this woman. Remember, Ruth has had no children. She's been married once before, and for some reason, God withheld her the ability to have children. She didn't have children with Mahlon. This is a tremendous blessing. They go on to say, may you be renowned in Bethlehem, which we will read into much more. And so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and she went in with her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And one verse, she goes from not having any children, she goes from being a Moabite woman, a Moabite widow, and one verse, she goes in to be his wife. She goes into conceiving and having a child. We see the blessings of God, the providence of God, the plan of God come to full fruition in Ruth chapter 4, verse 18, and she bore a son. The plan of God being fulfilled here in this moment. And the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more than to you 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. In one verse, Boaz and Ruth are married. In one verse, they have a son. The narrator wastes no time here. Notice the tone change in verse 14, though. It's not Boaz that redeems Naomi. The theme all along, the idea all along was that it was going to be Boaz to save the day. But what we see here is that it's not Boaz that is Naomi's redeemer. It is the child. Verse 15, he shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. The story comes to an end. Ruth with a husband has redeemed her. Naomi with the grandson has redeemed her. And the grandson named Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David. The father of David. Most of us in this moment can breathe a sigh of relief and contentment. One of the most dramatic stories in the whole Bible has come to a close in the most beautiful ways you could ever picture. Everyone is living happily ever after. How often does that happen in the Bible? If this were a movie, we would be expecting the credits to begin rolling, but the narrator still has something left to say. In verse 18, he says, now these are the generation of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, and Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab, and Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. This morning, this Christmas Eve morning, why are we looking at the book of Ruth? Why is this so important? Because we don't just end with Obed in the lap of Naomi cooing the night away. We are reminded this morning that the story has only just begun. May you be renowned in Bethlehem as the blessings that are pronounced. May his name be renowned in Israel. While spoken in Ruth chapter 4, these blessings carry on for over 1,000 years. Obed, this child of the Moabite woman named Ruth, would become the grandfather of the great king of David, the great king of David who is in the lineage of the Messiah, the Christ. That day in Ruth 4, when Boaz went to the city gates to redeem Ruth, he had the right to redeem her as a kinsman. He had the resources to redeem her with his land and money. He had the resolve to take on any consequences that might come with her. Little did he know that on that morning when he was making known his intentions to marry Ruth, God was carrying on his eternal plan to bring about redemption through him, through Ruth. Little did Boaz know that Obed would not just be another son and Jesse just another grandson. But God was keeping his promises of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, to bring about one who would crush the head of Satan, and Genesis chapter 25, to bring about a blessing to all nations through the line of Abraham, and Exodus chapter 25, that the redemption would come. That day when Boaz was acting in faith, God's sovereignty was again on full display, and we've seen this morning in Matthew chapter 1, when we read the book of the genealogy of Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham, Abraham the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed, and by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Asaph the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the deportation. And after the deportation, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, and Joseph the husband of Mary, whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. When we look at these names, we don't just look at a list of people. We look at the providence of God in perfect timing, in perfect place, at the exact right moment. The exact right moment at the exact right time. Think about this morning in relation to your life. We started Ruth chapter 1 talking about how God often ordains tragedy to set the stage for triumph. Think about this in relation to your life. Think about how God is ordaining every moment, every name in your life, every name in your family, every person that you know. They're not wasted. Every child, every moment is in the providence and in the hand of the King. Ruth, a Moabite woman, makes the genealogy of Jesus through Obed, a son. This morning, when we think about our brokenness, When we think about our pain and when we think about our suffering, when we think about whatever's holding us back, when we think about all the things and the baggage we bring into this life, there's a message of hope for us all. A message of redemption has come into this world, and he did not come by accident. Catch this. Jesus didn't come by accident. He came intentionally. And he used the stories of Naomi losing her family when they were being disobedient, deciding they were going to go and find their own path to provision. He used the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Tamar and Ruth. He used the stories of Ishmael. He used the stories of Adam and Eve. He uses the stories that every person. He came and he's coming intentionally for the purpose of bringing redemption into the world. He didn't come by accident. He has been planning his arrival throughout all the ages, throughout all generations. We look at Matthew chapter 1, it's not just a list of names to see who can pronounce it the best or who can read it the fastest or who can understand where they come from or where they line up in the Old Testament. He gives us the list of names so that we can understand that he arrived at the perfect moment. And he arrived through these people, through these generations, to display that he is God. And even when we don't understand the details or the circumstances of the problems and the pains and the suffering, he's put it together. It's like when you look at that 3,000 piece puzzle that the pieces are about yay big, he says, I got this. Your view is this big. Your view of this world is this big. My view is bigger than this room. He says, you look at a piece on the timeline, I wrote the timeline. When we look at suffering, when we look at pain, when we look at joy, when we look at celebrating, when we look at all of these moments in life, he says, I put those there. I put them there to display triumph. I put them there to display the kingdom. I put them there to display my glory. Our suffering sets the stage for his triumph. Our celebration sets the stage for his triumph. Our mourning sets the stage for his glory. Our greatest days display the greatness of the King of Kings. And we notice throughout all of this, God is intimately involved in the life and the redemption of his people. And God, get this, God uses nobodies to introduce the kingdom into this world. We see that over and over again. We can say, well, David wasn't a nobody. Go read the story of David. He was a sinner among sinners. Sure, he didn't sin like I did last night trying to put together something for my kids, but he sinned. Yeah, all the dads in the room can laugh at that. You know what it's like to put together a toy? Uh-huh. But he was a sinner. God uses nobodies. And where did David come from? He was the smallest among the smallest children out on the hills keeping the sheep. He was a nobody. God uses nobodies. It's those of us who think we're somebodies that have a problem knowing who God is. It's in the life of Ruth and Boaz, seemingly footnotes in the history of the world, but they are more. They are nobodies who bring about the king. They are nobodies whom God gives us their story, their tragedy, whom God displays triumph, who display righteousness, who display holiness, to display the King of heaven. It's not by chance. It's not by coincidence, but it's a divinely orchestrated work by the King. A divinely orchestrated work by the King, by our dad who loves us, who's speaking through generations, reminding each generation that he is Lord. Remember the words of Exodus chapter 3? We were there just a few weeks ago. Remember Exodus chapter 3, God says to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. What's the end of this? He says, this is my name forever. This is my name forever, and I am to be remembered throughout all generations. What do we find in Matthew chapter 1? The generations. He's displaying in Matthew chapter 1, the promise of Exodus chapter 3, that he's going to be remembered for all generations. What do we find in Revelation chapter 6 and Revelation chapter 9? When he says, how long, O Lord, must this suffering continue until they all hear? What did we see in that promise in Revelations is that the generations are going to keep being and keep hearing the promise of God. We're not going to forget. It's not just about being remembered throughout all generations. It's also about the story of redemption. It's about the redemption of Genesis chapter 3 and Exodus, when God brought about the people out of Egypt. Here in the life of Ruth, and this morning as we come to this time of worship, is about redemption and recognizing that God has come. Tonight, come back tonight, because we're going to be talking about this passage tonight in Galatians chapter 4. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. When the fullness of time, at the perfect moment, God sent forth his Son, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. This Christmas Eve, let us be reminded that our need for redemption is not all the lights, not all the glimmering things. It is a desperate need for the glory of God. Or I look at this amazing romantic story of Boaz finding Ruth in the field and pursuing Ruth, and the romance and the love and the passion that is in the field. It's not our story. The redemption necessary for our lives took place not in a moment of divine romance, but in a moment of divine suffering. There was nothing that we can use to describe how Jesus came, he lived, and he took the wrath for us. This is what Christmas is about. The light coming into the world. Our Redeemer has come. He is worthy. He has paid the price. He has ransomed our lives. This Christmas morning, why do we celebrate? Let us celebrate the King. Let us worship the King.